Hi, I'm Richard Endress. Today I'm going to give a video tutorial about 81mm mortar ammunition, and more specifically for the World War II time frame. Now this will go prior to World War II because that's when the 81mm mortar was adopted. But my primary focus is really the World War II era. So the specific mortar rounds of ammunition we'll be talking about are the M45, the M43, and the M44. So with that, let's get started. And the first one we're going to start on is the M43. So just prior to this video starting, I had pictures of the M43, the components like the adapter, the fins, things like that. So the M43 was the original light mortar round that was adopted from the Edgar Brandt Company, but we used our own US made fuse. So what is unique about the M43 versus other M43 variants? The fins. The fins actually have a feature where they taper in, whatever term you want to use, they wrap in. And so propellant would actually be placed right in here. So when the mortar round was fired, the flash would go through these holes and ignite the propellant that was placed in here. Now some other features of the M43. So you got the wraparound fins that are steel, forged steel body, gas check grooves, and an adapter that's used to screw in the American fuse. This also is an M43. This one was actually made to be a practice round. It's got the blue paint with white stenciling. This one, however, does not have an adapter, but the stenciling indicates it was a very early World War II, late 1930s made round, so I purchased it for that reason. So that is the M43. Alright, so just prior to this video starting, you saw some pictures of the M43A1. And this is the M43A1. So the significant difference between the M43 and the M43A1 is it no longer has wraparound fins. And what they did was they had little spring clips to hold propellant in place rather than the wraparound feature of the fins. So identifying characteristics of this: steel fins, not wraparound, forged steel body, gas check grooves, and adapter for screwing in the fuse. So that is the M43A1. Alright, let's talk about the M43A1B1. And just prior to this video, I had some pictures of the M43A1B1. So what's unique about this one that's different than the M43A1? And that is, it's a one-piece body. There's no longer an adapter for screwing in the fuse. It's all made in a one-piece body. So let's go over the identifying characteristics of the M43A1B1. Steel tail fin assembly with no wraparound feature, forged steel body, gas check grooves, no adapter. So that is the M43A1B1. Alright, let's talk about the M45. So this may not be an M45, this might actually be the French version, but nevertheless, from everything I've read, it's going to look exactly the same, except the French version would obviously have a French fuse, the US version would have a US fuse. So the M45 stands out for being so large, it's almost 2 feet long, basically, very heavy, it's about 15 pounds, and it also has spring-loaded fins. So the way these fins were supposed to work was that they would all be put together more or less like this, not exactly, but they're spring-loaded fins. And the shock, concussion, whatever, of being fired would snap the fins out, and the diameter of the fins would then be greater than the diameter of the 81 millimeter mortar round. So it was designed to give better in-flight stability. Now the United States' experience with this wasn't good, whether it was because of the fins being damaged or the springs corroding or losing their tension over time in storage. So there were different things that happened. So by 1940, the M45 was declared limited standard. It was eventually replaced by the M56, and then later on there was a chemical version of the M56, the M57. So the M45, the heavy version, which was a copy of the French heavy 81 millimeter mortar round, didn't actually last that long in production. So these are actually very rare. This is one of the very, very few. I've never seen one actually in the field. I've only seen them in museums or for sale or something like that. I've never actually seen an M45 in the field. So really the distinguishing characteristic is the spring-loaded fins. And actually the boom on this is actually, from the gas check grooves to back to here, is actually quite short, and the body of the mortar round is actually quite long. So that is the M45. Alright, let's talk about the M43 suite of ammunition as a summary, and we'll talk about the M45 as well, and also the M44. So when the 81 millimeter mortar was originally adopted from the Edgar Brandt Company, 2 mortar rounds were adopted, basically a light and a heavy. Basically the only difference was that we used our fuses instead of French fuses. So the 81 millimeter M43 has the wraparound fins, forged steel body, gas check grooves, and then an adapter for the fuse. The M45 has the spring-loaded fins that spring out, and they're much larger diameter than the mortar itself. Gas check grooves, very short tail boom, very long body, very heavy, at about 15 pounds and about 2 feet long. Alright, so to go back to the M43 series, M43A1 gets rid of the wraparound fins and has a forged steel body, gas check grooves, but still has an adapter. M43A1 has the same sort of fins as the M43A1B1 has the same sort of fins as the M43A1, but it has a one-piece body with no adapter. There again, gas check grooves, forged steel body. So what it was originally envisioned as would be that the M43 would be the light round, but it would be high explosive. The M45 would be the heavy round, high explosive, and the M44 would be the practice round. Well, there were some problems with the production of the M44. So what ended up happening is all three versions of the M43, the M43, M43A1, and M43A1B1, all were also made training practice versions. If they were training practice versions, they were filled with a large amount of inert filler, a very small black powder charge, and then they had a live fuse. So basically the fuse would function, black powder would go off, and you'd have a nice small burst to at least see where the mortar round landed. So any of the M43 variants can be high explosive, or they can be training practice with a live fuse and a black powder charge. The M45, on the other hand, was strictly high explosive. So next, we'll talk about the M44. All right, let's talk about the M44. The M44 was meant to be the practice version of the 81 millimeter, and yet it's relatively rare. So there were obviously some snafus in production. The reason I know that is because it's actually stated in a publication. So according to OS, which stands for Ordnance School, 9-18, that's the publication, OS 918. It's Ammunition General is the title, and it's still dated July 1941. It states that considerable difficulty has been encountered in obtaining the cast iron shell. They're referring to the M44. And it has been necessary to utilize the M43 shell for practice purposes. Okay, so that was early in the war. Maybe they got it straightened out later on, and that could very well be. The problem is, I've never seen an M44. I've never seen one for sale. I've never seen one in the field. And it may be in the field, it'd be difficult to tell the difference between the M43 and the M44. I understand that. But nevertheless, I've never seen one. Never. Which leads me to believe they're actually fairly rare. Now the other thing is, when you go to the artillery ammunition publications from 1950, the M44 is not even mentioned. Now it could very well be that so many of the M43s were made during World War II that some of those surplus ones were just simply used for practice, and the M44 just pretty much went away. For whatever reason, the M44 is actually quite rare. So you are unlikely to find one. But let's talk about what the M44 was. What's the difference between the M43 and the M44, if any? Well, first of all, the M44 was made out of cast iron, not forged steel. All right? And like the M43A1B1, the M44 didn't have an adapter. You could screw the fuse directly into the round. It was a one-piece body. And that is according to, this is another publication, OS 9-18, Volume 3, Ammunition General, Trench Warfare Ammunition, 3rd edition, dated April 1943, on page 100. So also, because it's a practice version, the publication states, it will have inert filler and it will have a small black powder charge with a live fuse. Now the picture that I'll show of the M44 shows fins just like the M43 with the wraparound feature. Now I don't know if they ever changed those fins on later M44s they might have produced to the regular straight blade fins. That I don't know. It's possible, certainly because the fins just simply screw off. However, I will say there were never any variants of the M44 ever made, apparently. There's no record of it that I can find. There's no M44A1, no M44A1B1, nothing like that. Just strictly the M44. So it's for all those reasons that lead me to believe that the M44 is fairly rare and you're unlikely to come across it.